Let's talk about joints in Maya. What the heck are joints? Joints are transforms. What is a transform? You can make a simplest transform right here. Create, empty group. Right now we don't see anything. But if you go to outliner you will see this little group here. Click on it. You can see that it has all kind of values here. Translations, rotations, and scaling. This means it's a transform. If you don't see that, press Ctrl A. So joint is a transform as well. To make a joint, just type in joint in the Mel tab down here. Joint also has translations, rotations, and scale in channel box. So clearly it's a transform. It seems like our transform got parented to our group. That's because it was selected as I typed joint. So if you want to make a new joint, just deselect everything, click away somewhere, and type in joint again. For now, let's delete this empty group and joint inside of it. Now we can move this new joint around with W. We can also rotate it with E. And we can scale it. As you can see, rotating and scaling doesn't really show in viewport. To see the actual joint orientation, go here. Display, transform display, local rotation axis. Now as you rotate you will see the gizmo changing. Press plus to make manipulator bigger or minus to make it smaller. As you can see, scaling our joint doesn't update. And in fact, you should never scale a joint. Scaling is not recommended for joints. But you can always change the radius. Radius makes the joint appear bigger or smaller. Joints also have an orientation which is unique to them. To access this orientation, you have to go to Attribute Editor. Press Ctrl A. When you change this value in orientation, you will see that joint is rotating. Press Ctrl A again. Let's unhide the orientation in channel control like this. So you can see the joint orientations are basically rotation channels. It's like an offset on regular rotation. They display a bit differently, but it's pretty much a rotation offset. Now let's make a simple cube. The cube is also a transform. You can move it around and rotate it. For the cube, you can also change the pivot, press D or the insert key. Now your cube can rotate from here. You can move it from here or scale it from here. We can't really change the pivot for the joint. If we press insert or D, it doesn't really do anything. Joints are special because you can bind geometry to them easily. Select the joint and the cube, and then go Rigging, Skin, Bind Skin. As you move this joint around or scale it or rotate it, the cube moves with it. Cube geometry is being deformed by the joint. The transform is not moving. The vertices are following the joint. This is something you can do with joints only. For the most part, at least. Let's try a better example for skinning. Let's make a cylinder, then let's rotate it. Scale it as well. Add some subdivisions in here. Then make two joints. Make sure nothing is selected. One more thing. If you want to see a joint through geometry, go to Joint, X-ray mode. Now move the joint here. Duplicate the joint by pressing Ctrl D. Move it over there. Now that you have two different joints, select them both. Add geometry with shift mouse drag. Skin the geometry. Go skin, bind skin. Now you can see that when you move the joints around, the geometry is deforming and stretching. Another interesting quality for joints is that they can go back to bind pose. To do that, select a joint, then go to skin, go to bind pose. That jumps back exactly to the pose before skinning. That works for both joints and your geometry. When you parent your joints together, Maya will draw a bone looking like this. The bone is nothing more than a visual help. So if you want to, you can draw the joint chain here. Go to skeleton, create joints. Hold X and keep clicking on the grid. This is a joint chain. I never make my joints like that. I prefer to just make them separately and parent them together freely. To parent joints, you just have to select child then parent. Press P key and it's parented. To unparent, just press Shift P. It's the same as dragging them inside each other. Unparenting is as well, like pulling them out from inside each other. You can orient joint chains, but it's quite hard without special tools. You can also select the whole joint hierarchy. Trick question right now. How many joints have selected? If you said 1, you were right. If you shift click on this little plus here, look. The trick is to go to select, then hierarchy. If you like this useful button, use Ctrl and Shift, then click on it to save it. It will be added to your open shelf. Now for all of the hierarchy you selected, you can change their radius all at once. Use middle drag. Otherwise, you are only changing the first selected joint. To orient that chain, we need to select hierarchy. Then we are going to go to the menu here under Display. Display, Transform Display, Local Rotation Axis. Looks like it's orientated because we drew this chain. X is pointing towards the next joint. This is a standard Maya orientation tool here. Skeleton, Orient Joints. As you can see, X is the pointing axis towards the next joint. Middle Y is the last axis, last Y is the scene up axis. This is the most basic orientation setting. If you run it, it will stay the same in this case. So if you modify your chain by holding D and moving some joints around, you will see that joints are no longer aiming at each other. To fix that, we can orientate them with the same setting. Notice how now they are all aiming at each other in X-axis. Last joint has nowhere to aim towards, so orientation is random. Let's change it by going to Orientation Attributes. If we zero out the joint orients, the joint will assume the same orientation as its parent. One more thing about joints. If you scale them in hierarchy, they won't scale. But if you group them with Ctrl G, the group allows to scale all of them from the group's pivot. Now you can scale all your joints. However, remember, you shouldn't scale them without freezing the scale. Okay guys, thank you for watching this short intro to joints. Thanks for watching. For more information, send email to cornica3d@gmail.com. Make sure to visit our website at cornica3d.click. We have Unreal characters, Unity characters, useful tools, and CG tutorials.